Welcome to our first Impact Shakers talks. What is Impact Shakers? We are building an ecosystem, an impact ecosystem, and our goals are threefold. We are building bridges between impact and profit. We want to make entrepreneurship more diverse, and we want to create alternative financing. And how are we doing this? We have a startup studio in which we collaborate closely with a couple of companies. We have an online community for impact entrepreneurs. And we have a couple of online courses online, our first 4. And today we're super happy to launch our Impact Shakers talks, and which sold out. And I'm sure that a lot of this has to do with the amazing Maya Hasan. Maya is a social designer. She's a researcher and strategist, and is fascinated by how communication, media and technology influence human behavior. She's the director and founder of Azura Labs, a research and design studio, which provides consulting services to international NGOs and UN agencies, serving communities mainly in Africa and Asia. She's also on the leadership team of 50 Shades of Aid, a global support and advocacy network of humanitarian aid workers. She partners with organizations to understand users and designs social programs using design systems and lean approaches. And today she's here with us to help us improve empathy, communication, and collaboration while working remotely. Maya, it's up to you now.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction, Yancha. I'm really excited that I get to launch this series of talks with you, Impact Shakers, and the fact that it's on a topic that so many entrepreneurs, especially those in the social impact space, are dealing with. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we've all made the radical shift to remote work, and with all the excitement and the opportunities that it brings, I'm sure many of us can attest to the struggles and the real pain that comes with it. So while some of us have adapted better than others, many of us are still struggling to find the right tools or approaches or workflows to make it bearable, let alone enjoyable. And luckily, that's why we're having this talk. And while I can't promise that we're going to solve all your remote work problems today, we can at least start to identify those pain points, find the language to begin to address them, and provide some examples of tools or process-based solutions that have worked for others, including myself. So, and here's my name and company and email address for reference if anyone wants to make a note of that. So before we jump in, here's the brief agenda for the presentation. First, I'm going to do a quick self-introduction in addition to the one that Yancha just did for me. And then through the form of an activity, I'm going to ask you to do the same. I'd love to hear also some of the insights about the struggles and challenges that you're facing in your work. Next, we'll cover some key concepts and approaches related to remote work with a focus on empathy, communication, and collaboration on virtual teams. Also, we'll explore the attributes of various tools that businesses and organizations are using for virtual communication and collaboration, and the pros and cons related to those. Finally, I'll share some lessons learned from my own experiences working with virtual teams, and we'll close with a question-answer session, and I invite all of you to contribute questions throughout the talk using the chat feature of Zoom. So just drop in any question you have at any time, and Yancha will be keeping track of those and share those with me at the end of the presentation. Also, since I'm sure many of you have your own experiences and opinions and resources related to remote work or communication, I invite you to also share those in the chat, which we will save and share out with the whole group following the presentation. So once again, my name is Mahrukh Hasan, and I go by Maya. I'm a social researcher, designer, and strategist, fascinated by how communication, media, and technology influence human behavior. I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm the director and founder of Azura Labs. And I'm also on the leadership team of 50 Shades of Aid, which is a global support group of 25,000 humanitarian aid workers. And I have many other identities as well. And I share these with you because virtual work means the merging of our personal and professional lives in unprecedented ways. It has its ups and downs, but in the long run, in my opinion, bringing our full selves to work is good for everybody. It can establish trust, flexibility, and diversity of thought and opinion that, if done right, are key ingredients for creativity, innovation, and even joy. So next, I invite all of you to, I'd love to learn more about you, and we'll be using the Mentimeter platform for this activity. So if you could all use your phones or your laptops to visit this website, www.menti.com, and insert in this code. You can also use your phone, the camera function on your phone, to scan this QR code, and you'll be taken to a slide. So that is, you should find yourself here, and it's asking the question, what's your title, role, or function? So in 3 words, you can do 3 different words to describe. Are you a researcher? Are you a strategist? Are you an executive? Are you a manager? Are you an engineer? How do you describe yourself? So you can put in 3 options, and hopefully they'll start coming in as soon as you type those in. We'll give you a few minutes to do that. All right. Let's see. So looks like 8 people have, whoops, wrong one. 10 people, 13 people. Has everyone entered in their responses? I was hoping that a word cloud would pop up. Yancha or Diana, have you inserted some responses to see if it works? No? Okay, well, it appears we're having some technical difficulties. Let's see how that's going. So this happens sometimes, and unfortunately, we will just move on. So please type in the chat box what your this is technical difficulties. How do I go back to where we are? PowerPoint. There we are. Okay, technical difficulties. So we'll just move on. Please type in the chat box your various roles, and maybe Yancha can read them out to me.
We have mom, program evaluator, collaborator. We have another program evaluator. We have a research collaborator and writer, another researcher, evaluator, enthusiast, social entrepreneur, coach, strategy consultant, educator, communications, policy consultant, researcher, evaluator, MEL person. Someone needs to help me.
Okay.
Supporter, learner, and they keep on popping up.
Okay.
Improvement coordinator. Oh,
okay, fantastic. So we have quite a diversity of professions, quite a few evaluators. So welcome, evaluation community. So it's good to know what the different backgrounds people are coming from. I'd also invite you now to, hopefully this one will work, go to tinyurl.com and /pain spectrogram. So here the question I'm asking you is, what is the pain that you're experiencing specifically in relation to remote work? So what are the challenges, what are the struggles that you're facing in your day-to-day work related to virtual communication, collaboration? Once you visit this website, you'll be redirected to a Google Drawings platform. And so I'll show that on my screen. So you should all be seeing this. And what this is it's a visual collaboration tool. And the colored squares here, I'll show you, are what you can use as kind of like Post-its. So what I'm trying to do here is spectrogram is a tool that's used a lot in group facilitation. And it's a great tool because it allows you to gauge and assess various attitudes, opinions, beliefs, feelings, feelings and emotions in this case. I've pre-populated the diagram with a couple of feelings. So if you're feeling Zoom fatigue, for example, during the course of this Zoom meeting, you can feel free and describe that here. So you can type in a response and pull it over to a feeling or an emotion that you feel most closely resonates with what you're experiencing. So again, this would be related to your virtual work, your remote work experiences. If any of these feelings or emotions don't resonate with you, that's fine. Use a couple of words, write up to a sentence of something that's been on your mind, whether it's a challenge with your boss, with your team, with your clients, your customers, with your beneficiaries, whatever it happens to be, a challenge or other. Okay, so I see some responses coming in. I'm glad this one works. Focus is a challenge for someone. Distraction with children, yes, absolutely. We have parents who, when you're bringing your full self to work and you're forced to work from home, you have to deal with other distractions as well. And so there's children that you have to deal with. Feeling disconnected from team, work, and purpose. Hard to make a connection during an online workshop, and that's absolutely the case. That those two-way communication flows, that ability to really connect. Groundhog Day syndrome, I like that one. I've heard that one quite a bit. Same thing every day, not much change. Quite a lot of Zoom fatigue, loneliness. Grown adult child at home. Okay. So this is hard to prioritize, grieving the loss of Black lives, hard to focus. Absolutely, it's been a tough couple of weeks. Too many meetings is a really big problem, and something that I have a few resources that I can share with you. Questioning, do I need to have this meeting? Could this meeting be an email or really a quick instant message? So these are all great. Keep them coming in and leave them. I think we're going to continue, but I think this is something that we can come back to during the question and answer period as well. So if you have something that's related to this and you want to address, please bring it up in the chat and we can come back to it. So thanks for participating in that. And heading back to this one. So that was a spectrogram. So that's a tool that you can use in person, but you can also use it out online. And so Google Drawings is a great tool to make that happen. It's a free tool. It's something I encourage you all to use. So now we're going to move on to learning some concepts and approach. Specifically, the approach that I use is human-centered design. So here, what I'm talking about is human-centered design experiences for virtual teams. But what does that mean and why is that important? So I would say if there's only one idea that you take away from this talk, I would recommend that it be this, that effective virtual teams are intentional. They involve understanding human needs and repeatedly exploring and testing tools and processes. So that sweet spot in the middle there is the intersection of emotions, processes, and functions. So those are all things that need to be kept in mind. One doesn't exist in isolation. And so where should we start? And we should always start at understanding human needs. And after doing that is the testing of the tools and the processes. Tools is another word for technologies or platforms or even resources. And processes are the series of actions or steps that you need to take to achieve a particular result. And of course, there's the iteration that's inherent to human-centered design is that you adapt and repeat because, fixing something the first time is not going to work. Things change, people change, needs change. And so it's important to continue to reassess that. And so in this case, achieving the particular result is what we're looking for is higher engagement, higher collaboration, higher productivity, better communication. And it's not just about, being nice to your employees or your staff or your customers, clients, partners, research subjects, whoever it is. It's about advancing your social and business mission. And that's why this is really important. And when we talk about human needs, the critical concept is always empathy. And a lot of us are familiar with the golden rule. It's found in tradition after tradition and something that many of us have grown up with. It's about respecting others. And here it is, do unto others as you would want done unto you. But it is lacking and inherently problematic because the focus, as you can see on the words I've underlined, is you. And so I challenge you to adopt a different rule, which is the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is a cognitive exercise that challenges you to adopt the perspective of someone else and start thinking about how they are different from you. So here it is, the golden rule rewritten, do unto others as they would want done unto them. And a very simple example of this is you, for example, as a single extroverted person, may really enjoy going to an office organized virtual happy hour once a week. But your colleague, who is a mother and a wife, perhaps doesn't have the time, energy, or interest to make it to one more obligatory social virtual event. So by all means, organize the events, but don't expect everyone to come or don't require everyone to come, and think through alternative ways for others to socially connect at work without taking away from their home life. And I thought it would be helpful to share with you 3 different types of empathy as defined by Daniel Goleman, a scholar of emotional intelligence. So the first type of empathy is cognitive empathy, which is about perspective taking. And this means, kind of like the exercise, the platinum rule exercise that we just did. So it's about recognizing a different lived experience. It's the ability to use different mental models and different language to intellectually understand someone else's needs. So it's related to thought, understanding, and intellect. The second kind of empathy is emotional empathy, and it's more about sensation taking. So it's about the ability to feel or channel the pain that someone else is experiencing. As this is a really deep form of empathy. It's quite a powerful skill or trait, and it's something that therapists and coaches are particularly gifted at. It's really important for the cementing of social relationships. It's about rapport and connection. And the third type of empathy is compassionate empathy, which is also known as empathic concern. And it's about taking action. So with this kind of empathy, we not only understand a person's predicament and feel it with them, but we are also moved to help if needed. And while many of us skew to one side or another, we're more thinking or more feeling, more fixing things even before going through the thinking or feeling stages. The key is about striking the balance in which there is intellectual understanding and rapport and enough emotional detachment to be able to act. So it's also the type of empathy needed to create sustained social change. And so how does empathy relate to remote work? And it comes back to human needs, right? If we keep our people at the center of our design efforts, we improve communication, collaboration, and engagement. And so here are a few more concepts that are key to understanding remote work and the attributes of various technologies that can help or hinder our efforts. Remote versus face-to-face. Face-to-face is straightforward. Remote, digital, and virtual, we tend to use interchangeably, but sometimes it helps to get specific. For me, remote is the catch-all term for both digital and virtual forms of work, because remote just means physical, at a physical distance. And digital refers to your digits, right? So your fingers, your toes. It's about tactile instruments, and for me, it's easy to just say it's about typing, right? So whether it's using your computer, your laptop, your phone, those are tactile instruments. And virtual is something that mimics physical reality. And at this point in time, the technology is mostly limited to visual and audio representations. So that's Zoom conferences, phone calls, those sorts of things. We also have synchronous and asynchronous communication. So communication implies directionality. So in more than one person, right? You're having a conversation, a dialogue. But it can be two-way or one-way, right? So you think of mass communication, one-way communication flows. Even this Zoom meeting that we're having, for example, it's mostly me talking at you, and you have the option of communicating with me through chat, but it's somewhat limited. So it's important to think about that as how we are communicating. It's about giving and receiving, speaking and listening, and then I moved on. I totally skipped over. Let's started talking about communication, so let's finish that. Collaboration is the action of working with someone to produce something. It's about co-creation or co-development, cooperation. So each concept between communication versus collaboration could require different tools. Coming back to synchronous versus asynchronous communication, synchronous is real time, right? Happening at the same time, and it's something that you would have in a dialogue or a conversation, face-to-face conversation. Asynchronous is more related to email, for example. You'll send something and then you'll wait and you have no idea when you'll get an answer back. Even instant messaging sometimes is not quite so instant. So it could be synchronous if the person is there and available and present and active and online, or it could be asynchronous if that person is unavailable. And then finally, we have secure versus insecure. And here, I'm not talking about feelings. I'm talking about digital security. So your privacy and the commodification of our data, which has become a real problem. And when communicating online, we have become more aware of the importance of this. And when it comes to our digital safety and security, not all platforms are created equal. And I encourage you all to educate yourself on the security policies of the various tools that you're using. But I would recommend, especially if you're working with sensitive data or information, that you strongly consider free and open source software that consistently builds in privacy by design. Now, let's move to taking a quick look at some of the various tools and technologies to support remote work. So I've created this diagram, which will break down the various tools available to us and what their strengths and weaknesses are. I have here on the vertical axis virtual versus digital. So really, I'm saying that virtual here means visual, and digital is more related to typing. We also have communicative, which is more two-way communication flows, and then collaborative, which is more about group work and teamwork and that sort of thing. So in this, in the top right-hand corner, we have the visual communication box, which is the Zooms, the Google Meets, the Skype, the Jitsies. So Zoom we're obviously using now. Zoom is a great tool for when you have a ton of people, you're doing a big presentation. It has a lot of different features, and they've been increasing their security and privacy features. So they're doing pretty well right now during the COVID-19 pandemic. Google Meet, the free version used to be very, very limited. Now, during the pandemic, they've opened it up, their business version, to everyone, and so you can host to a maximum 250 participants, which is really great. And it has a number of features, not quite as many as Zoom. Skype is a very traditional tool that you've been using for a really long time. I find it to be extremely useful in very low bandwidth environments. So if you're working with people in remote locations or who do not have access to strong network or bandwidth, it's a good alternative. Jitsi is a fantastic tool. It is an free and open source technology, and it's a great alternative to all of those above. You also have in the communication, typing, messaging, instant messaging area, WhatsApp, Line, Viber, depending on the country that you live in. I'm sure there's different options there. There's also, of course, virtual office spaces, which are great for communications and collaboration as well. Slack and Teams are pretty effective. Mattermost is a free and open source version of Slack. So it's a little bit limited in terms of features, but it is a great alternative. Facebook, of course, some people choose to use Facebook. That's always an option. over in the bottom left-hand corner, we also have Mentimeter and AHA slides. So these are interactive presentations that you can do. So there's not quite, there's not a lot of visual collaboration or communication going on. It's usually a little bit one way, but if you want to participate, you want your participants to be able to interact with you, it's a great way to take surveys and polls and that sort of thing. Finally, we have Office 365, Google Docs, which are word processing, spreadsheet editors, things like that, work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and then your project management softwares, which again have really pretty comprehensive free versions. And then finally, I would say this quadrant, the top left-hand quadrant, is a quadrant that's fairly, I wouldn't say underdeveloped, but there's a lot of potential here, I think, for a lot of people to use it. So this is where visual collaboration happens. So it's that tool that we just used, Google Drawings, when we use the spectrogram functionality, you're able to basically function as a whiteboard or Post-its. It's great for ideation and brainstorming, research and design, and those types of things. So Google Drawings is free. Mural and Miro have free trials. Mural and Miro are used by a lot of designers in that space. So I would encourage you all to check those out. And finally, going into lessons learned. So I'm going to share some lessons learned while designing human-centered experiences for one of my NGO clients. So first, a little bit of background. For this international NGO, I advise a distributed team across multiple time zones for a large media project based in South Sudan. So almost 3 months ago, international staff were evacuated from South Sudan due to the COVID-19 threat. Locally based South Sudanese staff stayed in the country, and our team has since defaulted to East Africa time zone for most meetings and collaborative work. This map shows our very dispersed team spanning multiple time zones. Our poor colleagues in North America have it the worst, and I'm the one in Asia. That's me in Thailand. So after this transition, we were forced to ask the question, what is the pain that we are experiencing on the South Sudan team? And what is this pain as a result of working virtually? And here I'll address just 3 key pain points that I noticed on my team and others, but there are of course many more, just not enough time in this talk. So the first pain point was digital isolation, loneliness, or disconnection. A recently published study in the US found that 87% of those living alone are struggling with loneliness and social isolation since the COVID-19 outbreak. And on the South Sudan team, we had a habit of Skype audio calls. This is what we would see when talking to someone. You couldn't see people's facial expressions or if they were gesturing. You didn't have a sense of if they were distracted or having a side conversation. This also led to an uneasiness that meant we would frequently jump straight into work talk with any kind of casual conversations. And a lot of the time it felt like business and business only. And I personally felt a bit tense. And there's a reason why. According to a well-cited study done at UCLA, only 7% of communication is actually dependent on words. This means we rely heavily on tone, facial expression, and body language to interpret meaning. So when we were only using audio calls, we were losing over 50% of our ability to communicate. So something needed to change. Because I saw the effect this was having on my team, I decided to gently encourage everyone to use video. The default is now that the video is on, with the option, of course, to opt out. For example, if it's 3 a.m. in your time zone, or for our South Sudanese colleagues, the power is off and your internet bundles just cannot support the additional bandwidth. This happens a lot. The video is not perfect. Sometimes it's heavily pixelated and you don't always get what everyone's saying or doing, but it's 1,000 times better than audio only. And for one of our colleagues in Mountain Time Zone in the US, who was actually onboarded while 100% remote, this was really critical to forming bonds with the team. even more amazing for the South Sudanese staff and partners, this has been their first time using video conferencing for work. And we've had our fair share of challenges, but in general, it's been a positive development. Another pain point for our team has been digital chaos, which I describe as confusion and overload when it comes to communication channels and tools. And I'm sure everyone can relate to the feeling of anxiety of an overflowing email box and constant notifications. So before, the complete chaos and lack of order in regards to communication channels meant you might get an email or a phone call or a DM or Skype message or a Teams message or maybe all of the above. And you never knew what you were going to get and where you were going to get it. And you also didn't know what the proper way to respond was. There was a lot of confusion. So understanding this pain, I decided to create a communications protocol, which is what you see on the slide. The protocol outlines what communication channels should be used and when. Some organizations might devise a protocol in the format of a decision tree with branches to help you decide what is appropriate and when. For our team, Microsoft Teams is now our default platform for all communications, and all other platforms are secondary. So you see here, we had some questions, if it's internal, if it's a meeting, does it need to be documented short term? So we had all these questions that we included in the protocol. So for example, email and Skype are only used when Teams is not possible or appropriate for whatever reason. WhatsApp is currently only used for emergency purposes. Finally, we have the pain point of the digital divide, which I consider to consist of two main things. First is the traditional understanding of the digital divide as relates to access and quality. So who has access to reliable Wi-Fi or higher bandwidth and the relevant infrastructure that goes with it, and who doesn't. And second, there is the challenge of digital literacy, which creates, of course, divisions. So simply put, some people need more support than others, and we have an obligation to help them learn so that they can participate. So before, in terms of infrastructure, low bandwidth and poor connectivity are facts of life in South Sudan. It also depends on where you're located. Even in the best of circumstances in Juba, the capital city, there will still be lags in audio, images will be pixelated, calls will drop. The other consideration has been digital literacy. People just don't feel comfortable learning new tools on their own, especially when it means abandoning what they've grown comfortable to using, even if it's not as effective as the newer tools. So there are a lot of challenges here, but Maya, the eternal optimist, said that these challenges could be mitigated. So the way I decided to mitigate the digital divide on our team was via three approaches. One was kind of the obvious investments in higher bandwidth. Two was stronger facilitation, and three was customized training. So the bandwidth is pretty straightforward. Organizations need to make those investments for remote work setups at home. In terms of facilitation on Teams calls, I facilitate the process of people speaking one at a time so we don't talk over one another. If someone drops off the call, I make it a point to ensure that they can join one way or another. Sometimes this even means something as complex as someone calling me directly on Skype and talking through my computer to join the others who are having a Teams call. So it's complicated, but it works. And in terms of training, I spent days with my team members, making sure they understand how to use the various features of Teams. And I've encouraged other team members to contribute training sessions on other platforms, such as Trello, which is a light touch project management platform. We have a long way to go, but we're making really good progress. And here's your key takeaway one more time. Effective virtual teams are intentional. They're about understanding human needs and repeatedly exploring and testing tools and processes to figure out what works. And that sweet spot in the middle is the intersection of emotion, process, and function. And I had promised 5 tips. So we always start at understanding human needs. Ensure digital literacy and discipline. This is really crucial. making sure your team members are all on board. 3 is testing and adapting various tools. The functionality and the usefulness of tools may change over time. Establish and follow a communications protocol. And of course, anticipate, prepare, and facilitate. So things don't always go well the first time, especially if you're organizing a training session. It's important to prepare in advance. It's really crucial for virtual work where they may have technical difficulties. And finally, here's a cheeky bit of encouragement to you as you try to implement these principles in your own remote work setup. For those who are not entrepreneurs or CEOs or directors of your organizations, you don't have to be a boss to be a leader. And this is the perfect moment to step up and start designing with empathy, equity, and inclusion in mind for more effective virtual teams. So at this time, because my Mentimeter is not working, I'm going to hand it over to Yoncha. I hope this was helpful, and thanks for your time.
Hello. So we have one question ready for you, and it's a question which is very similar to how you handle real-life meetings, I would say, or trainings. And the question is how to deal with people who are hijacking a session by interrupting, always being the first to respond to questions and being long-winded, etc. How to ensure that all participants can give their view when this happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Yoncha, just to clarify, I don't know if it was included in the question. Is this specific to remote work workshops, or is this just in general? You're on mute, Yoncha.
I just got the answer in the chat. The answer is yes.
Yes, specific to remote. Okay, yeah, that is a really great question. The wonderful thing about remote work, so there's pros and cons, right, of remote work, virtual setups. The one really handy function is the mute all function. So I would say don't be afraid to use it. If you're a host and things are getting out of hand, you are more than within your rights to use that function. And so it can be in a very polite way. You know, you explain yourself just like you would in real life, in real time. And so I would say make use of all the tools that you have. You can direct message a participant as well, so you can have a private conversation while you're having a live session. So there's different, it depends again on the platform that you're using, and there will be various ways to address a situation like that. But I think really strong moderation, facilitation techniques, which are true for in-person as well as online, would be the same.
Then a question from December. For folks new to human-centered design, what introductory resources would you recommend for us to learn more on human-centered design?
Absolutely. There's tons of resources out there, a lot of books, online resources as well. I would say the more kind of obvious foundational type sources that you can find are IDEO, so IDEO, IDEO. There's also IDEO-U, so there's university and online university that have tons of courses. So they also have a Creative Confidence podcast. There is also the D School at Stanford, which has tons of information there, and books related to the authors and the scholars that work there. So there's quite a lot online. I think that would be a good starting point.
Then I have a question from Lisa Unti. Would you like to ask your question yourself, Lisa? Or should I do it? Okay.
Sure, everybody. Hi, welcome. It's very early here in California, so I'm in my jammy still. That's why my video's not on. I've been, as I said in there, I've been working 29 years at my company, and COVID hit. We all went home, but we have a blend of in-office workers and remote workers. And then the company made the decision to go 100% permanently remote. And so, it's some people say, well, how do you feel about that? Isn't that great to just work from home? And myself and some of my colleagues were actually having a big struggle with that. So it's that balance, right? We didn't choose to be remote workers from the beginning. So it's supporting the team, making a lot of different transitions. And you brought up so many amazing points. I think my biggest thing is while we're still transitioning is what are those tips? Because sometimes it's not business as usual when you have a team meeting, right? People have a lot of emotions and feelings. And so one thing we're doing is just starting out each meeting with how's everybody doing? Just creating the space for everyone to check in. So thoughts on other ideas would be helpful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've noticed a few articles making the rounds about email etiquette and communication, especially during these times. You have the COVID-19 pandemic, and then you have all the protests happening in the U.S. and globally. So, the issues of racism and the emotional labor and the taxing that's having on a lot of people who are working and kind of forced to speak on these issues. So absolutely, I think that is a great way to start things. But I think also respecting people's space and mental health, and that not forcing them to also share their feelings, because sometimes it's much better for them to hold that back and share at a time when they're most comfortable. So inviting that, but not pressuring others to do it as well. Important to keep in mind the needs of every individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah, we were coming up with ways to share, to draw our feelings or to share just with a visual, like a picture of something. So I love some of the resources that you shared. With all the whiteboard and stuff. I think it's great to just do that, and I think we do that. We're just I'm lucky that I have a really small team that I manage and support. We work together for a long time, but yeah, all those things you mentioned, we're all dealing with, and as are all of you across the world right now.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add one more thing, something that I thought of. Your point about drawings to express emotions is a great one. I think when you're working online, right, digitally, it's like, what's the closest thing to a drawing? And sometimes that's icons, sometimes that's emojis, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not always easy to do that. So one of the things that I actually wanted to do at the end of this talk, which due to technical difficulties I didn't do, but Mentimeter and other platforms that have interactive slides and online polls, you can use emojis to kind of do word clouds and things like that. So to express your feelings, sometimes it's just easy, right? And sometimes that's all you need. You just want to send an emoji and say that's how I'm feeling, right?
Yeah, I like that. It's a nice way to just take a quick kind of pulse, right, or a temperature, and then sometimes you just need to do that and then move on. But you need a place to just express it. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Then more straightforward question. Do you have any thoughts on lengths of meetings or sessions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Someone did say about too many meetings, right? That was one of the feedback about the challenges. Absolutely. I'm on the same page with you. There are so many meetings happening right now. And I think people are craving social connection, I think, because they're outside of the office environment. So on one hand, it's trying to figure out, okay, what's the balance? It's going from one extreme to the other. So I think being able to recognize that and have probably, if it's with your team, like your regular team, having a check-in on somewhat of a regular basis. So maybe that's once a week instead of every single day having a daily check-in. Maybe they don't need that. Or if it is a daily check-in, maybe it's just a 10-minute catch-up. If it's, there are some great resources that I'm happy to share with you about, how to make the decision of whether something is worth a meeting. So one is even considering that, do I really need to schedule this meeting? And then the second thing is, okay, if a meeting is actually necessary, what about the length? So it really varies. It could be as short as a 15-minute meeting. I would encourage people to schedule meetings in 15-minute increments, especially if you're in regular contact. If you're not in regular contact with the person, then I would say bare minimum 30 probably, because especially if you want to touch base, have a check-in in terms of emotions and things like that, scheduling 15 minutes is, it's really difficult to achieve both that sort of a social emotional check-in as well as something a little bit more functional.
We have a question on what happens if you get a new employee right now. How can you make them feel more included, build genuine connections, and have fun together? Especially if the employer is not taking the initiative.
Right, absolutely. So I've dealt with that same exact issue. I helped onboard an employee, and it was really challenging. He felt really disconnected. Even the team, it was hard to really form that connection. The time zone difference, and in addition, they hadn't actually physically met in person. There's a lot to catch up on, right? And building that trust and building those bonds. I would say definitely for the benefit of the new recruit, the new person who's being onboarded, use video as much as possible, at least initially, so that they can relate to you. We talked about body language and how important that is. That is something that you can definitely do. But again, I think it really depends on the person. So whoever is the manager or whoever is the colleague who's on the same team as that person, to really kind of check in with them and see what their needs are, right? Maybe they're okay. Maybe they don't need to have this constant interaction, and maybe you're projecting onto them. And maybe they would appreciate some kind of a social opportunity. So organizing like a virtual happy hour, or, doing some kind of a house party, right? That's an app that exists too. So there are various ways to do it, and I'm sure many people in this webinar, a lot of the participants probably have some ideas. So I would encourage everyone to also contribute resources and idea, and I'll do the same.
Okay, let's pick another question. I have so many by now. I want to know what happens when your boss is usually super busy and it is really hard to get in touch with her. Usually I would use times as lunch or the typical chit chat in the hall to put her on the current of my work. But now I have felt really abandoned and actually stuck at work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one when your boss or your supervisor is absent, and that sounds like something that's just as difficult in person as it is face to face. So maybe it's the time to push out of your comfort zone. Maybe it's the time to have some real talk and communicate that. So that's what we do sometimes, is we just skirt the issue, and you're able to find her in the hallways, in the office, but that's not really an option anymore. So sometimes you just have to have those hard conversations. And so I would encourage you to mention it and say that it's affecting you. And figuring out a solution. So sometimes that could be a standing meeting. Maybe that is the 30-minute meeting once a week or once every 2 weeks, but kind of getting it on the calendar, making sure that that's something that happens is one idea.
Okay. I noticed someone on the initial challenges brainstorm, so on the spectrogram, mentioned that they were feeling a lack of purpose. Do you have any go-to strategies to keep purpose at the center that feels authentic?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I feel like I would need a little bit more information to answer that one, because a lack of purpose sounds pretty existential. Yeah.
Can the person who asked the question give a bit more?
Yeah, that would be great.
Context. Where is the question?
Yeah, so I asked the question, but I was just noticing it wasn't my challenge, but it was something. I was on a webinar recently that was talking about kind of working with organizations to reframe their mission, their visions, and posed a similar question. And the question kind of comes from like a lot of things that I've been listening to. So, on like just habits of making folks feel welcome. So IDEO apparently, when they onboard new people, they on their desk chairs, they put like little notes of what impressed them during the interview. And so my question was really aimed at if there are any rituals, so not necessarily responding to an exact problem of why, you could get into a therapy session of why someone is feeling a lack of purpose, but just in general, as people are remote and they're not face to face, are there any rituals that just keep people reminded of the why of the work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Rituals are super important for team building. And so I would say that's something that you would do, whether it's in person or whether it's remote, something that one of the clients that I'm working with, the NGO clients, they have a weekly all hands meeting. So it's something that's usually about an hour, and it's an opportunity for everybody to speak. There's also a newsletter that goes out every couple of months, which is full of photos. And something that we're planning to do is kind of, COVID-19 type edition where everyone can take photos of themselves at home and share it. So it's also morale, I think, related to morale. So it's the sense of purpose in terms of your vision is something that should come from your leadership, ideally. But if it's not coming from your leadership, it's something that an idea that you can pass on to the leadership of your organization. Or if you're on a team, department manager or something like that, it's something that you can institute. So whether that is again, meetings, unfortunately, or like a nice note in Slack channels. You can have a dedicated Slack channel to putting out praise or something, or having celebrations and doing something special. There's a thing that exists that's called a kudo board. So it's a virtual board where you can kind of like a scrapbook. So there's various kind of virtual ideas that you can use, I think, to make people feel a little bit more purpose and connected to a team.
Okay, I'm seeing the same question return, but I think this one sums it up. Is there a platform where we can connect with one another to continue to share challenges and solutions after the webinar? And yes, there is. We can, after the session, I'll also assemble all of the tips you've been giving each other, because there's some nice stuff in the chat as well. We'll share the recording, the presentation, the tips, and we'll send you an invite. And since some people are excited to continue sharing, we'll create a group on our platform, and those of you who want to join can join. It's free, so you can decide. You can come and have a look and decide after that. Yeah, I think being considerate of everybody's time, we're gonna close it up here, unless anybody has one last very pressing question, but then you'll have to ask it in person. 3, 2, 1. No, okay, Maya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I have my contact information up on the slide, so if anyone would like to continue the conversation directly, please feel free to get in touch. That's my LinkedIn name, my email, and my website, so feel free to visit. Thanks. I had a great time.
Thank you,
Hope
Maya.
this was helpful.
Could you go to the next slides?
Yes.
So if anybody wants to join another talk, we have 3 more Impact Shakers talks planned. Goal setting is the next one. We continue on the uncertainty right now, and Jingping Lin will give a talk on how you can use OKRs as a tool to bring structure, focus, and motivation in your team. So hope to see some of you back. Thank you all for your time, and goodbye.